The air in the Colorado high country tasted of pine and cold water. At 10 years old, Jake's world was the creek that tumbled down behind his family's cabin and the forest that rose steeply behind it. That afternoon, his prize was 3 fat trout, their scales flashing in the wicker creel he carried. The sun was slanting low when he saw the smoke, a greasy black pillar that smeared the blue sky above the valley. He ran, the creel banging against his leg, the fish inside already still. He reached the overlook, and his breath stopped. The town of Cedar Ridge was gone, replaced by a roaring, crackling pit of orange and black. He fell to his knees on the gravel, the creel tumbling from his grasp. Gone. The white clapboard house with the blue shutters, the hardware store his dad ran, his mom's garden. All of it. Figures descended from the clear sky above, not on flying swords, but riding currents of shimmering air that bent the light around them. They wore simple, tailored suits of a material that seemed to drink the sunlight. With casual gestures, they summoned a downpour that hissed and steamed as it choked the flames. Only then, in the sudden quiet and the settling ash, did the scale of it truly hit him. Over 300 souls. His knees were raw on the ground. Elena Vance and Marcus Thorne from the Clearwater chapter were testing a new resonance technique. One of them muttered, voice tight. A miscalculation in harmonic focus. They're both primes. Another whispered, awe and fear mixing in her tone. Do we even report this? They glanced at the lone, ash-covered boy, a flicker of pity in their otherwise remote eyes. One of them, a man with a sharp face, tossed something onto the ground near Jake. A smooth, dark stone that held a faint inner light. Then, as one, they ascended and were gone, vanishing into the vastness of the Rockies. Jake stared at the spot where they'd been for a long time. He mouthed the names, feeling each syllable carve itself into the fabric of his mind.
Elena Vance.
Marcus Thorne. Finally, he picked up the stone. In the ruins of the fire station, he found a shovel. He dug graves in the hard, scorched earth. He buried the remains, what was left of neighbors and friends, until his hands blistered and bled. Behind the foundation of his home, he dug one more, small and deep. That night, he slept curled beside it, the smell of damp earth and charcoal in his nose, pretending the warmth of the sun still baked into the ground was a presence. The moon was a silver coin pinned high in the black velvet sky when he came. Jake, coated in grime, looked up. The man stood in the ruins of the kitchen, backlit by the moonlight. He wore a suit of pristine white linen, his hair the color of fresh-fallen snow against a dark spruce. It seemed to glow. A white silk scarf hung around his neck, its ends stirring in a breeze Jake could not feel. His eyes were the gray of a winter lake at dawn. Are you Marcus Thorne? Jake's voice was a rusted hinge, unused for days. He looked at the man, asking the name branded on his soul. No. Then, did you come to finish it? Jake's vision trembled. He reached out and dragged the wicker creel to his chest. The dead trout inside had begun to smell. The man in white regarded him with that glacial calm. Yes. He lifted a hand, fingers curling slightly. An invisible force seized Jake by the throat, hauling him off the ground. He choked, feet kicking at empty air. Instinct made him claw at the pressure. His blackened, dirty fingers brushed the immaculate white fabric of the man's jacket, leaving stark, grimy streaks. A shudder went through Jake. He forced his hands down, balling them into fists at his sides, nails biting into his palms as he fought the drowning sensation in his lungs. Revenge first, then you. He managed to force the fractured words out, his eyes pleading upwards. Something shifted in the winter-gray gaze, a faint line appearing between the brows. After a long moment, the pressure vanished. Jake collapsed onto the ash and splinters, gasping. Your resonance potential is mediocre, the man stated, his voice devoid of inflection. Even with relentless training, you would never match Marcus Thorne's natural progression. Jake pushed himself up, coughing. He stretched a shaking hand, his fingers closing carefully on the hem of the white linen jacket. Are you stronger than him? Naturally. His small hand tightened in the fabric, his gaze locking onto the man's impassive face. Teach me. After my revenge, you can end it. I do not take students. A pause, then a clinical addendum. I do not accept slow learners. I learn fast. Please. His ruined throat could barely shape the sounds, each word a scrape of pain. He forced them out one by one. The man looked at the dirty hand clutching his jacket. He carefully pulled the fabric free. If you climb the 7,000 steps of the Ether Spire, I will instruct you. I will show you the paths of power. Jake, still on the ground, nodded up at him. Okay. The Ether Spire was not a mountain of rock, but a monolithic tower of fused crystal and steel that speared upward from the Colorado Plains. One of the 3 great bastions of the awakened in North America. The selection was notorious. They wanted pedigree, inherent talent, and an unshakable will. The aspirants who gathered at its base that morning were the scions of old bloodlines, polished and confident. And then there was Jake, holding his battered creel, smelling of smoke and river and dead fish. A space cleared around him as if by silent agreement. He ignored them, his eyes fixed on the staircase that spiraled up the exterior of the tower, vanishing into the low clouds. It was called the Ascent of Resolve. When a deep, resonant chime sounded from above, the crowd surged forward. Jake moved with them, a piece of driftwood in a stream. The first 3,000 steps were a brutal test of raw endurance. By the 1,000th, his legs were jelly, his shirt soaked through, and he was far behind the pack. Others glowed with subtle energies, their movements enhanced. He had only his own 2 feet. By the 4,000th step, the field had thinned. Those with mediocre constitutions were already turning back, faces etched with defeat, met at the base by waiting families. Jake had no one to meet him. Sweat stung his eyes. He ground his teeth and pushed on. Visions of wealth, of comfort, of pretty faces meant nothing. There was only the furnace blast memory of fire, and 2 names. With every step, he chanted them silently. Thorn. Vance. The crowd continued to dissipate. The ones at the front began to slow. Jake steadily, doggedly began to pass them. On the 6th segment, the realm of phantoms, they appeared. His father, smelling of sawdust and engine oil. His mother, her hands flour-dusted. His older brother, with his easy laugh. The family dog, Buddy, wagging his tail. They stood on the steps, their faces not burned, but pale and accusing, mouths moving in silent screams. Jake did not look away. A hot, salt-wet track cut through the grime on his cheeks. For every phantom that wailed, he took another step. The louder the silent cries in his head, the faster he climbed. He ran the last 100 steps of that segment on pure, unfiltered hatred. High above, on an observation platform that seemed to float among the clouds, the masters of the Ether Spire watched. A silver-haired man with a kind face stroked his beard, his eyes on the monitors. That one has a formidable will. But the anger, it's a wildfire. Without careful tending, it will consume everything. He glanced at the snow-haired man standing apart, silent and still. Selim, you've never shown interest in a protege before. What draws your eye today? Selim's long, pale finger touched the screen where Jake lay gasping on the 6,000th step. I am waiting for him. The elder masters exchanged surprised looks. Only the silver-haired man nodded slowly, a thoughtful light in his eyes. Jake's body was empty. He crawled onto the 6,999th step. The final step, the 7,000th, was a sheer glass-like surface that seemed to radiate psychic pressure. A gust of engineered wind from a vent nearly blew him off. Gasps came from the observers above. With a final, animal sound, he threw himself forward. His chest hit the 7,000th step. Instantly, his mind was flooded. Temptations of absolute power. The screaming of the dead from Cedar Ridge. a physical gravity that felt like it would crush his bones. His mind rebelled. Blood trickled from his nose, spattered from his lips onto the clear step. His fingernails, scrabbling for purchase, split on the unyielding surface. Is he dying? He's just a kid. What could drive him this hard? Looks like he's finished. What do you think, Marcus? The name was a lightning strike. Marcus. Jake's vision, swimming in darkness, snapped into a single point of clarity. He pressed his bloody hands down and pushed. He rose, swaying to his feet. Staggering, he passed one aspirant, then another, then a third. A fourth boy lay on his side, his eyes wide with jealous fury as Jake stumbled past. As Jake drew level, the boy lashed out with a last burst of telekinetic energy. It hit Jake in the back like a truck. He was flung forward, off the staircase, tumbling down through the air to land with a sickening crunch on a lower observation platform, 50 stories down. That kid's a monster. If he'd made it into a master's circle, what a waste. With that kind of drive, the voices buzzed in Jake's ears, growing faint. Through a haze of agony, he saw a figure in white step to the railing of the highest platform. Selim's voice, cold and precise, echoed through the tower's amplification system. Harm to a fellow aspirant is an absolute violation. This boy's spirit is corrupt. He is expelled. Then, the voice from that night in the ruins seemed to whisper in Jake's memory. I do not accept slow learners. With a tremendous effort, Jake lifted his head. High above, Selim looked down, his expression unchanged. He seemed to turn away. No, he had lost everything. He would not lose this chance. Not now. As Selim's back was fully turned, a sound went up from the watchers. He's moving. Jake tore open the wicker creel. He grabbed a limp, rotting trout and bit into it, tearing the cold flesh with his teeth. He tasted nothing, smelled only decay. It was fuel. The obsession to be Selim's student was the only engine he had left. Something entered his stomach. A sliver of strength returned. He got up and began to climb again, back towards the main staircase. Others saw him and gave up, overwhelmed. Soon he was alone on the ascent. 3 days and 3 nights passed. The only observers left were the masters, a few curious senior students, and Selim. The last 10 steps were a canyon of pain. His hands and feet were raw. Cheers and shouts from the students bled into a meaningless roar in his ears, which were filling with blood. His vision flickered. Then he saw it. A fold of white linen. He looked up. Selim stood on the final step, remote and perfect as a glacier. And Jake was the mud at its base. A fresh wave of blood filled his mouth. He focused on that white hem. He crawled, dragging a smear of red behind him. At the last inch, his bloody hand reached out and closed over the pristine fabric, staining it crimson.
Selim bent.
A warm hand settled on Jake's matted hair. From this moment, you are my student. I am Selim Reed. I give you the name Ash. Jake looked up and tried to smile. He wanted to speak, but more blood welled up. As darkness pulled him under, and he felt himself being lifted into white-clad arms, his final, blurry thought was a spark of regret. I've stained his clothes. The climb cost him. His hearing was damaged, his vocal cords scarred, his knees and legs requiring extensive cellular reconstruction. A year, perhaps 3. It is irrelevant. My discipline is the blade. Silence is no hindrance. He liked it when Selim communicated, the thoughts appearing directly in his mind, clear and calm even when his own ears heard nothing. He would not be able to hear his master's voice, but he could understand the principles of energy manipulation, the philosophy of the strike. He went down into the main tower sometimes, to watch Marcus Thorne, to study his patterns, his alliances, his easy confidence, to imagine when it would end. His potential was ordinary. So what? Selim had said, on the path of awakening, the first requirement is clarity of purpose. The second is perseverance. The third is talent. Possess two and you are exceptional. He was not gifted with easy understanding. So Selim would stand behind him, his hands over Jake's, guiding the practice blade through the same forms, again and again. It is good you have this fixation, this obsession. The path is paved with them. Let it be your compass, your edge. The 10-year-old boy looked down at the wooden sword in their joined hands, thinking, obsession? The need to end Thorn and Vance? Selim watched him as if reading the thought. He guided Jake's hand through a simple, direct thrust. The practice blade hummed. Across the training courtyard, a granite boulder silently split into two clean halves. With that thrust, you could end Marcus Thorn. Jake stared at the cleft stone, then down at the simple wood in his hand. He looked up, but Selim was already walking away, only the back of his white jacket visible. That shouldn't take too long. He did not know that not too long would be 11 years. The blazing starflowers bloomed across the foothills, a scarlet blanket under the vast sky. He gathered an armful and climbed back to the austere, glass and steel residence at the pinnacle of the Etherspire where Selim lived. The red flowers looked like drops of blood in the stark, minimalist space. Footsteps, silent, but he knew the unique, clean scent of ozone and frost. Master, your retreat is over? He turned. Selim stood there, as ever in white. His long hair was loose. Seeing Jake, the perpetual ice in his eyes seemed to thaw, just for a second. A faint, almost invisible smile touched his lips. Yes, the Etherspire tournament is soon. Then the Quantum Glade will open. Jake's eyes brightened. So Master would be present for a while. Cool fingertips tapped his forehead twice. You have advanced 3 sub-ranks during my absence. Your focus is intense. Jake reached out and caught Selim's sleeve, looking up. Ash has a debt to pay. Diligence is necessary. A faint, knowing look. You are teasing me now. He had practiced the blade forms until his palms were a roadmap of broken blisters and calluses. The white gauze he wrapped them in was often stained through. Reaching for a scroll, he left a faint, rusty print on Selim's cuff. He saw it and let go, quickly hiding his hands behind his back like a chastened child. Selim said nothing. He simply guided Jake to a chair, retrieved a salve from a hidden compartment, and began applying it with meticulous care. Master, I dirted your jacket. It is only cloth. The man who had haunted his dreams and waking hours for over a decade was here, holding his hands. The turmoil of the day, the constant churn of his purpose, settled into a deep, quiet warmth. Master, I will challenge Marcus Thorn in the tournament. Selim's fingers stilled for a moment on his. A long blade, sleek and gray, flew from a recess in the wall and landed in Jake's open palm. Do not be hasty. Elder Lin is notoriously protective. The tournament is a spectacle, not a hunting ground. Then when? The frustrated hatred in his eyes was gently brushed away by Selim's thumb on his temple. Impatient. I have secured your opportunity. The Quantum Glade is the place. Jake's grip tightened on the cool metal of the blade. He nodded. 11 years of waiting. It was enough. The Etherspire tournament filled the central atrium with light and noise. Once he had lain broken looking up at these balconies. Now he stood on one just behind Selim. His gaze found the silver-haired Elder Lin, and beside him Marcus Thorn. The early matches were forgettable. Then Elena Vance of the Clearwater cadre took the stage. Her beauty was sharp, her talent obvious, and the crowd reacted. Marcus Thorn's attention sharpened, a possessive gleam in his eye. It was well known he coveted her. He had, after all, erased a town to impress her during a training exercise. Elena stood waiting. Her opponent did not appear. A voice from below called out, "Guess they know better than to face Miss Vance." Laughter rippled. Jake stood, bowed to Selim, who gave a slight nod. He walked to the railing and dropped a token with his name into the dueling ring. Passing Marcus, He let the killing intent he usually kept leashed flash in his eyes for a split second. Marcus met his gaze, startled, then frowned. From a distance, Jake saw Elder Lin lean close. That one's will is extraordinary. Are you certain there is no history? None, Master. I've seen him around the lower levels. Perhaps some perceived slight. Elder Lin shook his head. That look was not about a slight. That was something deeper. When Jake landed on the stage, Elena gave a polite nod. He ignored it, one hand resting on the hilt of his gray blade. The crowd murmured at the discourtesy. Seeing his direct stare, Elena flushed slightly, momentarily disarmed. I don't believe we've met. I'm Elena Vance of the Clearwater. The starting chime sounded. He moved. The blade was a blur of lethal intent. 36 arcs of compressed air, howling like banshees, boxed her in from all sides. Her shock was genuine as several of the impacts threw her backwards. He stepped lightly, caught her before she fell, and spun with her in the center of the storm. To the crowd, it looked like a dance. In his arms, her shock turned to a confused, rosy-cheeked daze. The moment their feet touched the platform, his right palm pressed flat against her lower abdomen. A surge of cryogenic energy, honed by Selim, shot through her core pathways. Her eyes widened in horrified understanding before she crumpled, a spray of blood ruining her pristine outfit. You dare. The Clearwater chapter head was on her feet, a bolt of raw energy already leaping from her hand toward Jake. He raised his blade to meet it. Selim, from his seat, did not rise. He lifted a finger. The gray blade on the table beside him flashed. No one saw the energy discharge, but the chapter head was thrown backwards into her seat, the air around her crackling with nullified power. The rules forbid lethal force on a fellow awakened. Your student lives. If you wish to duel chapter head, I will oblige you. The unspoken threat hung in the air. Try it, and see what remains of you. Jake kept his head lowered, hiding a small, hard smile. Marcus Thorne was already helping a weeping Elena up, his eyes burning with promised vengeance. As he passed Jake, he hissed 6 words. The Quantum Glade. Wait for you. Jake did not watch the rest of the tournament. He had preparations to make. The tournament left Elena Vance's power shattered. The Clearwater chapter head raged to the Etherspire director, Selim's elder brother. Jake was made to kneel outside the director's office door, while Selim was summoned inside. Strangely, there seemed to be no psychic dampening field. With his level of perception, he could hear every word. Is this the boy from the prophecy? The convergence point? Selim's cool voice replied. It is. The divination was clear. A spirit marked by profound loss. A vessel for a rare, corruptive resonance. If it turns, the consequences would be global. Your own ascension is tied to his fate. Eliminate the variable before it manifests, and you would be the first of our order to breach the final threshold in 3 centuries. Our name would be legend. Brother, what holds you back? A long silence. Then Selim, his life and death are mine to decide. Do not press me. So, at 10 years old, when Selim came to the ashes, it was not to save, but to exterminate a predicted calamity. Jake knelt on the cold floor, his blood feeling like fire in his veins. Elena and Marcus were the murderers, but he was the born abomination. He looked at his hands, at the scars from years of gripping the practiced sword. They were a testament to the only truth he had left. He had never hidden his devotion to Selim. The fact that Selim, austere and uncompromising, had defended him, a future cataclysm, must have shaken the director to his core. This was a trap. Let the boy learn his mentor's ultimate purpose. Let despair or rage corrupt him fully, giving Selim a clean reason to strike. Or, driven by twisted gratitude, perhaps the boy would simply take his own life to fuel his master's glory. His fingers dug into his own thigh. But he had known, even before the ascent, that Selim's endgame involved his death. The only new information was the reason. Selim had promised him revenge first. He believed him. If he could have that, dying by Selim's hand was not a punishment. It was a release. He had loved him since that first night in the ruins. It was a forbidden, impossible thing, a student's adoration twisted into something more. To die by his hand, at least it would not stain him further. As the Quantum Glade portal shimmered open, representatives from every major enclave in the Americas gathered. Jake stood with the Etherspire contingent, surrounded by hostile glares from male students who still saw Elena Vance as a lost prize. She was now just a beautiful accessory on Marcus Thorne's arm, her power gone. Marcus looked smug. The hatred in his gaze now mingled with a cruel anticipation. Jake took one last, long look at Selim, then turned and stepped through the iridescent gate. The Glade's transit was random. When the light faded, 3 other Etherspire students stood with him in a forest of glowing, crystalline trees. He drew his blade, his mind on his quarry. But the 3 moved as one, forming a line between him and the path. "He's the one who broke Miss Vance," one said, his voice tight. "Consider this justice, right? For Clearwater." They attacked. He dodged, kicked one away, parried another's energy whip. The 2 behind him lunged. He bent under their strikes. Then, recalling a form Selim had burned into his muscle memory, he pivoted into the air. A single, clean, downward stroke. He turned. 3 bodies lay still on the luminous moss. He did not linger, leaping onto his blade to fly, seeking his target. He passed 2 massive, bestial constructs locked in combat. He meant to avoid them, but a flash of crimson caught his eye. A single blazing starflower growing at the base of a crystal. On impulse, as one beast's foot descended toward it, he darted in and snatched the flower, sealing it in a stasis case. The movement drew their attention. One swung a crystalline claw at him. He could have evaded. But at that moment, a viridian energy arrow, thick as his arm, streaked toward his heart from the trees. He chose the beast. The claw caught him across the ribs, sending him flying 20 feet into the trunk of a tree. The impact drove the air from his lungs, and he tasted copper. A moment later, several figures landed nearby. Elena's face, cradled against Marcus's chest, instantly contorted with hate. "Senior, look what he did to me. You have to." Marcus kissed her, cutting her off. "Of course. I'll save the final blow for you, my dear." Elena looked at him with fervent gratitude. Jake used his sword to lever himself up. Besides Marcus and Elena, there were 6 others. 4 were Marcus's cadre mates. The last 2 were stone-faced men. Mercenaries, Jake knew, hired by Elder Lin at great cost to ensure his precious student's survival. Selim had briefed him on every detail. "If you go, your death is almost certain," Selim had said. "Do you still go?" "Yes." Thorne and Vance killed over 300 people in Cedar Ridge. The debt must be paid. Selim had watched him for a long, silent moment. Finally, a nod. "You are my student. Until I permit you to die, you will return to me. Alive." Warmth had flooded Jake then. "I obey, Master." He did not have to live. But Marcus Thorne had to die. He fought. The blade Selim gave him was an extension of his will, but he was outnumbered and outmatched in raw power. Cuts opened on his arms, his back, his legs. He became a figure painted in his own blood. Marcus watched from the rear, Elena clinging to him, utterly untouched. "I thought he'd be more of a challenge," Elena sneered. "Overrated," Marcus agreed. "Foolish, too, risking himself for a weed." They came at him again. He was at his limit. It seemed the prophecy would fulfill itself. The born destroyer would walk the dark path. But he couldn't die. He had promised. He had to go back. Holding the gray longsword, he reversed his grip. With a cry that tore from his ruined throat, he plunged it into his own chest, aiming just left of center. Dark, almost black blood welled around the blade and dripped onto the glowing moss. A mist, not gray but deep, light-absorbing black, began to pour from the wound, from his eyes, from his mouth. Coiled around him like living shadow. He's triggering the corruption. The resonance shift is immediate. I thought it was a gradual process. Marcus's voice held a new note of fear. No one answered him. As the blood, his life, his pain, his obsession, flowed out, a terrible cold filled the cavity of his chest. But his perceived power level surged, stabilizing at a frequency that matched that of the Clearwater chapter head. He's unstable, now before the transformation settles. But Jake, or what was becoming of him, was already moving. The shadow was his weapon, his armor. The debt was finally due.